Welcome to the DaVinci Hour podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Maxwell Cooper, and in this podcast series, I interview physicians, medical innovators, and entrepreneurs making an impact on healthcare. This podcast is produced by DaVinci Academy, a multimedia medical education company that provides podcasts, video courses, and digital textbooks. You can see more on our website, www.dviacademy.com, and our YouTube channel, youtube.com/c/DaVinci Academy Med. Hey everybody, welcome back to the DaVinci Hour podcast. I'm very honored this week to be joined by Scott Becker, who is the founder of Beckers Healthcare and then also a partner at the law firm of McGuireWoods in Chicago, Illinois. So Scott, welcome to the DaVinci Hour. Really appreciate you taking the time to come on.
No, Dr. Cooper, what a pleasure. Thank you for having me and excited to get to visit with you and learn more as well. So thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. So maybe give the listeners a little bit of background, where you went to school, and then kind of maybe a little bit of an overview of your legal work and some of the other things you're involved with.
Certainly. Sure. So I'm business-wise, there's two main things I do. I'm the publisher, founder of Beckers Healthcare. I'm also a partner at McGuireWoods, a health law practice. We'll talk about how those things evolved in a little bit. I went to Harvard Law School, and the thing about going to Harvard Law School, if somebody doesn't tell you that in the first 10 seconds, they probably didn't really go there. It's so obnoxious, can't help yourself. Went to Harvard Law School. I was the claim to fame is I was a teaching assistant to Barack Obama, was in one of my classes. And President Obama was a magnificently smarter person than myself. So he used to sort of say to the class, I think this is what Scott is trying to say. And I kid you not. And he did it in such a positive, nice, professional way. And I felt like on a Saturday Night Live skit, I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I meant. But he was just magnificently bright and gifted and could cut to the chase on things where I had more struggle with it. So the core of introduction. Partner McGuireWoods, founder, publisher of Beckers Healthcare. I'm a Harvard lawyer, went to University of Illinois as an undergraduate, finance and accounting undergraduate, CPA in finance, and ended up sort of building my entire professional life in different ways in law or media in the healthcare sector, and then do just a variety of different things around it and have loved it. So, a great pleasure.
That's awesome. That's an interesting story about President Obama. I imagine going to Harvard, you rub shoulders with people that either at the time or that go on to become, leaders in our world is pretty fascinating. So I guess maybe give us a little bit of an overview of your legal work with hospitals, how you got into doing that, what type of, services do you provide for hospitals and kind of your areas of expertise in that regard?
Sure. So I started as a lawyer, out of law school. I was 25. Of course, I had no idea what I wanted to do other than I really sort of wanted to be generally in business law versus not. Spent the first 3 years at a mega law firm, and at the mega law firm, you just says it's like being a resident. You just work a crazy amount of hours. People say to you, do whatever you want in your free time, and you can do whatever you want entrepreneurially and stuff like that. And you realize, of course, I have no free time. So went through a period of time where being at the law firm, being at home, it was all just brutal. So it was a very challenging, early career. And then about 3-4 years into it, decided one way or another how to build a specialty. Like you had to be a specialist in law if you wanted to have, a decent life and some control of your life and stuff like that. So decided to pursue a specialty, looked at a variety of them, had done some healthcare transactional work, some healthcare business work. And it just seemed interesting. It seemed like, and people were, there were people that said like, oh, you're going to limit yourself too much. But even then it was 20% of the economy. I figured it out, find a way to thrive within it. Joined a law firm that was a much smaller law firm that just really thrived and enjoyed it and just spent a ton of time at this mix of sort of healthcare and business. So it was sort of the example would be working with the health system here back in the day, helping them complete 70 different acquisitions of practices, big and small. It would be, then moving forward, working with one of the places I grew a specialty in early was in outpatient surgery centers, ambulatory surgery centers. So the core of the practice ended up being working with large hospitals and health systems, working with surgery centers and surgery center chains. And then over time, as the whole world evolved in healthcare, working with investors in healthcare, meaning private equity funds invest in healthcare, in different kinds of deals in healthcare. It wasn't out of like, when people say to me, somebody asked me this question recently in a law school class that I was a guest teacher at, was, do you feel like you're morally fulfilled because you practice in healthcare law? And the direct answer was no, not really. It just happened to be the business I was in. I mean, I love the people I work with. I work with a tremendous amount of mission-centered leaders. But do I feel like myself, I'm making a difference in healthcare? Not particularly. I don't feel like, oh my God, I'm doing this great work. I'm altruistic. I'm in healthcare. I feel more like I'm at the intersection of sort of media, business, law, and healthcare. And it's been fascinatingly interesting. But I don't feel like I'm doing some great service, not like people like you are, or hospital leaders are, or health system leaders are, or physician leaders are, in actually providing care and overseeing care and supervising care and trying to make sure everybody gets care in this massive country that we've become, and make sure there's enough people providing care. I don't feel like I play a part of that. We live in sort of the media world, the legal world, and it's great. It's great fun. But my hat's off to those like you who actually provide services, take care of patients.
Yeah, no, thanks for giving us that overview of your legal work. And, certainly, the business and legal aspects of healthcare are also important. We can't do patient care without making sure we keep the lights on and keep everything kosher. So appreciate that. And I wanted to ask you what led you, you're this busy, lawyer, you're, working on all these different aspects with hospitals and healthcare systems. What led you to, starting Becker's Healthcare, and how did you get started doing that?
Sure. So it started literally 30 years ago now. And I started it, and it was really an advent to trying to build a practice, build a brand in healthcare. And it was really at one point sort of just, an advanced hobby, marketing within healthcare, stuff like that. And at some point, which is true of all things that become successful, I started hiring people and building a team. And then when we started to hire people and build a team, we ended up building it into a much different thing, thanks to the leadership of our CEO, a bunch of other people. It just built, and then it became much more of a media company than a branding marketing thing. So when you talk to people in hospitals, health systems, many of them will have no idea that there's a Becker or that I was a lawyer, before I was a media person. But it was really it was originally brand building. Then it became a real company. So I hired great people. And the trick to anything, to any success in life, at least I think for 99.9% of us, is hiring great people, building great teams, and so forth. So ended up with great teams in the media business, great leadership there from Jessica Cole, a bunch of other people. Now we've got, I think, 100 plus employees at Becker's Healthcare that are in, 30 or so that do writing every day, a bunch that do event planning, a bunch that do business development, a bunch that do, data and analytics. And so there's a whole group of people, events management and so forth, planning the conferences and agendas. But it became a much, larger, just a real enterprise. It's been a fascinating labor of love. And so we've ended up sort of straddling both the legal practice and Becker's Healthcare. But it was originally started for one reason, and then it really became a true media company covering healthcare. And we love it. We get a chance to visit with the most interesting people, and we love it. I mean, it's really, I wouldn't get to know people like yourself other than the fact that I've got this Becker's Healthcare, and it's been greatly fascinating and fabulous.
That's amazing. And maybe just give us an overview of, everything, it's such a multifaceted business now. Obviously you guys do, medical news, and then you cover topics like, the economics of healthcare, you have podcasts, other, you obviously have these events that you talk about. So maybe give us a little bit of overview of what your different offerings are and your mission now at this point.
Yeah, no, certainly. So the core is there's really four cores, and there's lots of sort of smaller areas. This goes back a long time. There's the biggest part of the business is hospitals and health systems, and coverage for hospitals and health systems, basically leaders of hospitals and health systems. The second largest is health IT and revenue cycle, but things health IT, digital health, revenue cycle. The third and fourth are this mix of sort of ambulatory surgery centers, which is our original vertical line, and then orthopedics and spine. And then we also have areas, lots of different areas around those, whether for CEOs and CFOs of hospitals and health systems. We've got some other lines entirely like cardio and dental and GI and so forth. But those are much smaller areas of the company. We've also got increasingly a payer focus because there's a big audience for what's going on with payers and technologists going to payers and everything else. And our goal is, simplistically, we talk about being a magnet for readers, for listeners, and for audience attendees, for attendees of conferences. We want to be a magnet. We have to be so good in this very information overloaded world that people find it very valuable to listen to us, to see us, to all those things. So we view it as just critical that we try and be that, a magnet for all of those audiences.
Great. Tell us maybe a little bit more about some of these events that you host. I've heard great things about them. Unfortunately, I haven't yet had the opportunity to attend one of them, but I hope to in the future.
Well, hopefully you'll come free of charge. You'll come as a participant. You'll come speak. You'll come be involved. We're very big on a number of things. We try and teach and entertain. So we try and make sure, so a conference of ours, we've got this health, IT, and revenue cycle conference coming up. That's in October 4th to 7th or 7th to 10th, I think 4th to 7th. But the point being, at the end of the day, there might be 100 or 200 educational sessions. And there's also lots of sessions that are built more around networking, entertainment, and stuff like that. I think, for example, President Bush is speaking at that conference. I know, Scottie Pippen speaking at the conference this fall, Shaquille O'Neal speaking at the conference this fall, Michelle Wie, the famous, golfer, woman golfer, golfs like her handicap's only completely a billion times better than my handicap. But so we try and make sure that both teach people lots of chances to learn, but also entertain, that it's fun and interesting and it's got a vibe. And it goes back to what we talked about a moment ago, which we have to be a magnet for attendees. We got to be like, it's got to be worth coming. And it can't be worth coming just because they're getting CME credits. Then we could do that any way they want, or any kind of professional credit. It's got to be worth coming because they learn, they come away inspired, they come away excited, they come away, positive about their profession, their career, what they're doing, and they get a chance to educate and meet with and visit with peers. So conferences, years ago, we started investing in, keynote speakers. So it makes it just a different vibe, more interesting as well. We've had this year, former President Clinton, former President Bush speak. We've had Magic Johnson, Peyton Manning. We've had just a whole ton of great leaders speak. Hillary Clinton, Nikki Haley. We try to be completely apolitical, so people on both sides of the agenda, and it's just great fun. It just keeps it interesting. It at least gives people a highlight every day, in addition to learning, a lot of learning and networking with their peers. And so we view it as great excitement. We've got 3 conferences this fall. We've got the Health, IT, and Digital Health. We've got our Surgery Center conference, which is 28th annual one, which is just crazy. And then we finally get our hospital CEO and CFO roundtable conference, which is a smaller conference and completely full, completely sold out, and a total, and interesting. I mean, hospitals and health system CEOs are all in the spot of 1, daunting financial challenges, 2, trying to figure out what to do, 3, trying to figure out how to make it work, in a very challenging environment. So we try and give people lots of information on all those things the best we can. And it's a lot of shared information, data, and hopefully people come away entertained as well.
That's awesome. No, and I mean, thank you for providing these venues for people to network and meet each other and learn more. I'm curious, what's your general advice for physicians trying to build their network? Obviously with other physicians, but also with non-clinicians involved in healthcare as well, like yourself, the legal aspects or leadership or business. What would be kind of your advice as far as that goes?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, it's a great question. I think in terms of constantly, one of the spine surgeons that my spouse talks about all the time, talks constantly about, what are you doing besides medicine? And what you're doing besides medicine is so important for so many reasons. I would say the most important is, if you're a physician and you just do medicine for 30, 40 years, that's all you do, the chance of you being burnt out and sick of what you do, I think, are just very high. And so more than anything else, you got to be doing something, not because you want to make more money on the side, not because you want to build a brand, not because for whatever reason you want to. Those are all good reasons. For whatever reason you want to, you have to have hobbies and endeavors and engagements outside of practice if you don't want to be completely burnt out in 30, 40 years. At least is my experience. And there's obviously counterexamples to that. But by and large, I think you have to be doing something besides just practice if you want to make it work. The people that I've worked over the course of years, there's people that are able to set some sort of boundaries and those that are not. And those that are not ultimately have to switch jobs periodically, have to switch things periodically, have to switch teams periodically, not because they're not just magnificent, but they have no ability to sort of say, no, this is all I'm doing right now. For example, you were, as I understand it, on call all weekend. You've got today doing some of the other stuff, not grinding away on Monday after being on call all weekend, because that's an exhausting way to live. And people could do it. You're much, much younger than I am. People could do it. They could grind through it for X amount of years, but sooner or later it catches up on you. So whether it's learning, engaging, what you're doing right now is you do podcasting, allows you to talk to very interesting people, not so interesting people, but a whole mix of things, and allows you to keep learning yourself, with yourself being the pivot point around that. So that's obviously a pleasure. People go to events. I'm a big fan if you go to events, but if you go to events, you got to engage. You can't just be there. You have to engage. I'm a big fan of, you want to get better at something, you probably got to be humble enough to seek advice on how to do it. It's something that men generally, particularly, aren't particularly good at. So if you look at a thing like either a sport we're trying to get better at, an area we're trying to get better at, there's this old stereotype that men will spend so much time and effort and energy before they finally ask for help or directions. And there's a humility in being willing to say, I can't figure it out. I've got to sort of learn and I need to ask somebody. But it's hard. It's hard to do that for most of us that are achievement oriented. Think of ourselves as alpha types, have been successful, whatever we do. But then to actually seek help and be humble and say, I need help with this is a challenging thing. But I think constantly looking for that help in what you're trying to learn too. But I think it starts with this doctor, Alpesh Patel. I'll give him credit for it. He is a spine surgeon in Chicago. I think chairs the Northwestern department, but constantly asks, what else are you doing? What else are you thinking about? And it's not that you don't want to spend, I'm always a believer you spend 80% of your core of what you do. So 80% for you might be being the greatest interventional radiologist in the country, great at what you do. And then 20% is, what else am I doing to expand my network, to think, to learn, to grow, to constantly be growing? And I think that's a great way of looking at things. What am I doing as a core, spending X% on? And then what am I doing to grow and learn and grow? And I think it's just so important. And everybody's got to figure out different ways to do that. But I think it's so important. And most of us need help in doing it. We can't do it ourselves.
Yeah, no, I think that's a lot of excellent points you just hit on there. I memean, one, just, having a little bit of humility. I mean, a lot of physicians have, a little bit of an ego, as I'm sure you've noticed over doing this long enough. And so I think knowing your limitations, knowing what you do know, which obviously for clinicians is clinical practice, but also, being willing and able to ask for help and ask people like yourself who are experts in other areas. And I think those are excellent points. And then finding an outlet. I mean, like you said, this podcasting, it's a great outlet. People ask me how I do it or how I have the energy for it. And, I love doing it. I wouldn't do it otherwise if I didn't. And it's like you said, it's a great balance to, some people, they find different ways to balance their work. But this for me is just, I love talking with people like you and meeting new people and learning. Every one of these episodes I do, I learn something new. And it's just fun. I enjoy doing it.
No, we think it's a great thing.
I guess kind of going off that, how do you balance doing Becker's healthcare and being an attorney? I guess how do those balance each other, or how do those benefit each other?
The number one core, I would say, around all things is it's all about building teams and then figuring out your strategy. But if you build teams, they go hand in hand, but you can't do anything significant without building teams. So in the law practice, and this goes back a long time ago, I was intent on building a specialty, building a practice, and to build a practice and build a specialty and to take great care of clients, because that's what it's all about. At the end of the day, you could bring in clients into a law firm, but unless they're taken care of magnificently well, they don't stay with you. It's much like you could work with a patient in interventional radiology. Unless you do a great job, you haven't really done what you're supposed to do. So you got to do great at what you do. So, but you can't do that without teams and people. So the core, the overlapping trend in both areas, aside from them both overlapping in healthcare, the original legal practice and still the legal practice, and then the Becker's healthcare, is the overriding thread is you can't do anything without great teams. It's all about sort of recruiting, retaining, keeping, growing great teams, and then sort of figuring out what you're going to do and what you're going to do and how you do it. There's some guardrails, but within those guardrails, there's some pivoting and changing over time. I mean, if you like at Becker's Healthcare, one of our important lines is, for example, podcasts. We do hundreds of podcasts a year. It's one of the highest ranked ones on the Business News podcast, overall podcast. And if you would have told me that wasn't a thing 3-4 years ago, so you sort of have to constantly sort of pivot and stay close to your audience and where they're at and what they're listening to, what they're doing. I'm in my mid to late 50s. If you would have told me 10 years ago I'd be podcasting, I would have said that was crazy. I don't know what that is, and so you're constantly sort of within the guardrails of trying to take care of your audience, trying to take care of what business you're in, take care of your customers. You're pivoting and growing and changing. And so, I mean, the great concept is we had to be great, absolutely great as a law firm in what we did, had to be absolutely great in a media company is what we did. And the only way to do that is to have clarity about what you want to do. But more importantly, is great is build, retain, recruit very talented people and great people and keep that sort of those teams going. And that's the hard work of business. Everything else is easy. I mean, it's hard in some businesses to get a client or a customer or an advertiser or an audience member. Much harder is keeping that client, that audience member, that advertiser. If we had our editorial wrong a few days in a row, our reader stops reading our electronic daily newsletter. It doesn't take very long before they say, that's not hitting me, that's not reaching me, that's not interesting to me. People make that decision when they look at the ray line, the sort of subject line, in literally a nanosecond. Is that interesting to me or is that not? And then they decide they're going to be a regular subscriber or not. And it's the same thing with everything you do. It's got to be done great. As you take care of patients, you take care of the referral source, you take care of the people you work with, they got to know that Dr. Cooper cares, that he's on it, that he cares. And in our business, you just can't do that alone. You got to build great teams to do it. It's just too exhausting if you want to try and do it yourself. You just can't be sort of everything. And so you have to build great teams. And you have to be clear, this is what we're trying to be great at. So those are the two big things that we think of.
Interesting. I'm curious. I know you've had the opportunity to meet and talk with a number of, leaders in healthcare, hospital system CEOs, hospital healthcare executives. I guess, are there any common traits you see among them, that you think make them successful or good leaders in the particularly the healthcare space?
I think there's ultimately there's no substitute for them being very engaged in what they do. There's no substitute for taking a lot of attention, paying a lot of attention to it, being very engaged. And then sort of the combination of that is hiring great people, building great teams. I had a chance to talk last week to the CEO, for example, of the Banner Health System in Arizona. And Banner Health System, Peter Fine, they've grown over the last decade to being a regionally dominant, great system. And it's amazing sort of the constant work on strategy and people. And most of these leaders, are successful over a long period of time. They may be fine on PR, they may be okay on PR, they may not be good on PR, but they're very good at dealing with people and building teams. And they're very good about clarifying and developing, here's what we're trying to do. Here's what our mission is. I mean, they were there, worked through literally a 20-year strategic plan since he got there, which is an amazing thing to look at. Not what are we going to be doing this year, but how's this going to look in 5 years? How are we going to do that? So I constantly try to think about what is this going to look like, not just today, but 5 years, 10 years from now. And then who are the people that we need to make that happen? How can we do that? What's going to make that happen? And so it's, in so much of life, I am so much of an incrementalist that when I think sometimes about people that can do that, think about what's going to look like in 5 years from now, what's this going to look like in 10 years from now? That's very hard for me. But to be able to do that and to think about who are the people that are going to make that happen? What's the team look like? I'm amazed in the law firm. So many of the people that came up with me, that worked with me, 20 years ago, are now leading the firm. And that's a great point of pride that the people that I worked with as junior people are now the leaders of the firm. Those are the who that made it all work and have built magnificent practices. So can you sort of build those teams? Can you build that strategic vision, that clarity of what you're trying to do? And then you got to be able to work well with people. I mean, there's no way around it. In the old days, I think even in the old days, it was probably overstated the idea of command and control, leadership. So at the end of the day, even then, people expect to be able to, to deal. We have this great concept that we want this intersection of people thriving and doing something consistent with what the firm needs to do to thrive. But we want the people thriving too. So if you have a partner in interventional radiology practice, you want them doing what the practice needs, but you also want them thriving themselves. And it goes back to what else are you doing? Like, I don't want somebody just being grinding their heck through life. I want them, they might not love what they do every day, but I want them liking it enough, and I want them having enough freedom, enough time to be fresh, to have time to be able to deal with stuff. I'll talk about one other subject, Dr. Cooper, if you'll indulge me.
Of course.
People talk about burnout amongst nurses and healthcare workforce and all that stuff and everything else. And they're, of course, right on. But there's no way to solve that without enough capacity, without enough people. For example, when people talk about we'll get them a massage, we'll give them a 12-minute break, we'll read to them a philosopher's book. None of that works. Those are Band-Aids. You need enough capacity to be able to freedom themselves to thrive and have time off. You can't solve this without more doctors, more nurses, more techs, or somehow another great technology that replaces them. But I don't see that happening. It's still a very caring profession. When I take my mom and dad, and we want people to help us, not just machines. We want people to be able to help us figure out, help us breathe, help us figure out what's going on. But you can't solve it through all these cute little Band-Aid things. You just can't do it. You've got to actually figure out, how do we improve nurse education? How do we make it quicker? How do we improve, physician education? Physician education is great. We turn out magnificent doctors. How do we do it in 7 years, not 10 years? Because if somebody's going to practice from 30 to 60, how do we get them practicing from 28 to 64? How do we make this a better livelihood, a better, easier way to get through school? Medical school is generally, medical education was designed pre the internet age, it's not that it's not fantastic. We turn out great doctors. Like somebody said to me, well, you can't make it shorter. There's so much to know. That can't be the answer. The fact that there's so much to know, but you have to make it shorter because people have to find out how to get that information. They're going to see a lot. They also got to figure out how to access and find that information. And so you become sort of a multidisciplinarian, but it's a fascinating thing.
No, I think that's a lot of great points you hit on there. I mean, both, the building great teams for leading organizations. I think that's a common trait we hear, and that's interesting to hear you say that as well. And then I think as far as the medical education front goes, I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's a lot of shift recently trying to make medical education more efficient, more innovative. I mean, as you know, the model for medical education is kind of antiquated. It's, we've kind of been using the same format for 100 years now that William Osler developed at Johns Hopkins. Kind of the 2 years in the classroom, 2 years in the hospital. And I think, there's a lot of schools doing some more innovative things. Part of what else I've done is some video courses for medical students to kind of make education more, accessible and easier and things like that on our website. And, after talking with some, deans and professors at other schools, I find that this is kind of the way they're trying to move and integrate those more into the classroom. And so I think that's an excellent point you make, kind of making education more streamlined, more efficient. Definitely. I think another question kind of segueing a little bit is, you've talked how you've done a lot of work with ambulatory surgery centers, and especially in my field of IR, but I think in a lot of other, surgical or procedure-based fields, people are trying to move things more outpatient. Just, you would know better than me, but, it seems like less overhead costs potentially, it's, patients like it better than, having to get shuffled through a big, large hospital system for the day. I'm curious from your standpoint, is that something you see more of expansion of in the future? And then is that something that more can be done in like a rural or kind of less populated area, or is it hard to do that in a metropolitan area where there's already so many players in the game?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So there's about 6,000 Medicare certified surgery centers in the country, and the big specialties for surgery centers, orthopedics, ophthalmology, gastroenterology, and pain management. Those are the 4 biggest specialties for surgery centers. And of course, there's lots of general surgery. There's lots of ENT. There's lots of other specialties as well. But the big 4: orthopedics, pain management, gastroenterology, and ophthalmology. And of course, there's not nearly the amount of greenfields, brand new surgery centers being built as there were, 10, 15 years ago. Now, every orthopedic group, every gastroenterology group, every, surgery group, ophthalmology group largely has a surgery center of some sort, largely, not everybody, but largely. And then there's also obviously a ton of physicians that are now employed, and their options for what they can own, not own, are different as well. So then you look at areas like cardiology, interventional radiology. There's been more and more looking at how can we develop surgery center options for those, but there's been a lot of pushback by CMS on what's allowed to move off the hospital list to surgery centers. For rural areas, it's challenging. Rural areas, same problem with everything. You need enough critical mass, and critical mass really means enough physicians to build a center. It's almost like you wouldn't build a shopping center without an anchor tenant. You won't build a surgery center without knowing you have the cases to make it go. And so it's not like if you build it, they will come. That's a prescription for bankruptcy. What really happens is you need enough surgeons up front that are part of that surgery center, that are invested in that surgery center, or a hospital that's going to really support that surgery center to build a surgery center. So it's an answer. It's not an answer for the most complex surgeries generally. Still, if you're in a rural area, unless you have enough physicians, a great healthcare community, a great healthcare system there, you're still going, to the more metropolitan area to get healthcare services. You're still traveling more and more. There's certain things you have to have locally, stroke care, a number of other things that you don't have locally. People's outcomes are just so much worse. But for a lot of surgeries, people are still going to have to travel because there's just not enough surgeons in those areas to make the surgery centers go.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's like you said with the shopping center analogy, like you need the customers there and obviously in the tenants as well. I'm curious, do you see this one, I guess, do you see more physicians trying to kind of branch out on their own or group together and start these, or is it more kind of at the health system level where they're kind of seeing opportunities to build these and that's where they kind of focus their efforts?
So the first wave, and this goes back 20, 30 years ago, the first surgery centers were approved a very, very long time ago now. The first waves were in, ophthalmology, gastroenterology, then orthopedics, and then sort of pain management. We've also got a wave, of course, going on in spine surgery as well. But what happens with GI, ophthalmology, have been so built out in so many places. There's not a lot of new GI and ophthalmology centers being built, though the reality is everybody at some age needs cataract surgery. A lot of it's going to be done in surgery centers. Everybody needs colonoscopies. It's going to be done in surgery centers too, or endoscopy centers. But most of the gastroenterologists and ophthalmologists already have some interest or some involvement in the surgery center. So most of the physician-alone surgery centers, there'll still be some built, of course, but a lot of that's already been built. So orthopedic group, the same thing. Everybody knows orthopedics, fantastic for surgery centers. Everybody needs orthopedics at a certain age. The procedures pay fairly well, and people can somewhat self-refer to the orthopod. Not everything goes through a gatekeeper. So orthopedics, surgeons have their own practice, busy and doing well, and so forth. So those are all going fine, but there's not a lot of new building going on. It's so much built. The newer building the last few years is either hospitals and health systems building, to expand their ambulatory footprint to try and progress out of the hospital into the footprint, or be able to leave room in the hospital for more important stuff or more bigger cases. And then it's private equity driven, sort of healthcare investor driven, that are buying up practice, buying up other things, and trying to build surgery centers around that. And typically doing it with physicians and physician practices.
It's interesting. As you may be aware, in the IR community, there's a big push lately to kind of build outpatient-based labs, and because a lot of our procedures can be done on an outpatient basis, and some of the I know of some physicians that are they're tired of working for a large group or a large hospital system, and they want to kind of take, at least even just take a little bit more control of their practice, and they feel like that it's better for their patients. I guess, do you have any thoughts or advice on like when would be a good time to do that? Is that something that's even realistic in this market? Is there certain areas it'd be easier to build one of those?
Yeah, no, it's hard for me I don't know that much about the office-based labs for interventional radiologists. I just don't know that much about it. I know at one point, interventional radiologists and neurologists were building radiation therapy centers and working on linear accelerators and stuff like that. The office-based labs in the sort of outpatient interventional radiology, I just don't know where the codes are from a surgery center perspective. With the cardiology codes, so much of it was moving to surgery centers, and then the CMS, the government, kept it so that you couldn't bill a facility fee through a surgery center. So you had to keep on billing it through your practice. I think the interventional radiology might be similar to that. I don't know. So what happens is people are billing enhanced professional services fees, and then paying the surgery center almost a rental amount for use of the surgery center where they're doing it, or what have you, versus doing it in the hospital, where the hospital gets both a facility fee and interventional radiologist or cardiologist gets their professional fee. So you've got sort of these challenges from a regulatory and billing perspective that make it very hard. But I just don't know enough about it. What I do know is if you were building something, same thing we talked about with the anchor tenants, you don't build it unless you know you have enough capacity to make it economically work. And you sort of have to talk to your customers up front, whether it's the big Blue Cross plans, the big Cigna, the big United plans, whatever it is in your market, I know whoever it is, CVS, I know whoever it is, but to know, will they allow you in contract to do it? Unless your business is so heavily Medicare, like ophthalmology, is that you're getting free Medicare patients that can do cataracts there.
That's interesting. I think, I've interviewed some people that are either, program directors or chairmen at these like private-demic type groups, if you're familiar with that term.
Yeah.
With these private practices
100%.
that try to be, also academic in a way. I guess, do you see that as kind of a viable model going forward where, as physicians, maybe they want to take a little bit more control of their practice, but still be a part of a big healthcare system or a big academic center and keep doing academic things in addition to being busy clinically?
Yeah, you see some great examples of it at some of the great academic medical centers in the country. At Rush in Chicago, you've got the Midwest Orthopedics Group, which is at Rush, which is, they are very, very involved academically with Rush, but they're also very independent. They've got this synergy with the medical center to go with the fact that they're also driven to have a private practice too. University of Pennsylvania, the CEO there, Kevin Mahoney, is a brilliant, brilliant person. He's constantly trying to create options for people to be affiliated with UPenn, Penn Health, Penn Medicine. It's called Penn Medicine, and also have people have some freedom and independence. There's more systems that are trying to make that work. Of course, as the world of medicine has moved more and more towards physicians being employed physicians. And that no great surprise there, just more and more of that. But there are certainly lots of great groups where they're a mix of private practice and heavily involved with the academic institution. And whether that lasts forever, I don't know. The people at Rush, for example, you got to be a highly motivated physician to really want to pursue both fully. I mean, it takes people that are really I don't know, they used to call him in baseball a 5-tool player, someone could, run, hit, field, et cetera, in catch, et cetera, and do all those things. Whereas in hit for power, in academic physicians that are also going to be in private practice, they got to be great with patients. They got to be great with research. They got to be great managing residents. I mean, they got to be great at a lot of things. It's not undoable. It's just a matter of, you get more and more people come out. So only 20,000 physicians graduate a year. A lot of them want a job in a profession, a job, but they don't want to run a private practice. I mean, they just, some do, some don't, but a lot don't. A lot want to sort of be affiliated, have a job, and it's a part of their life. It's not their entire life. Positive of that is maybe there's less burnout if people do that too. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a whole mix of physicians coming out and what they want.
Yeah, sure. And I think kind of going off that, I'm curious as we wrap up here, what's your advice to physicians who want to maybe develop their business acumen a little bit, learn a little bit more about the legal aspects, the financial aspects? Because I mean, as you know, we get barely any training at all with that in medical school or residency. And, I think even just knowing how to find the right people to run those aspects for you, in a sense.
But this is a great question. It's a great question. And it really starts with, I was on a podcast earlier today with somebody whose whole theory in life is on advanced learning, continued learning. And I'll take one of the comments that she made. It really starts with deciding, that you want to learn, besides being a great physician, you want to learn about the business aspects of what you do, and then it's a matter of, how deeply do you, and you just hit it exactly right. How deeply you want to dig into that versus you want to hire people to do that. And sort of the reality is there's got to be some combination of both, because you don't have to be an MBA, though I've seen plenty of physicians have gone back and got a master's in business or master's in health. And that's saying it's the nth degree. And there's a lot of places in between, but it starts with, I want to learn something, and learning something every day about business, whether in a formal or informal way. And then it goes to, even if you're just going to hire people to really run the business, run the office, do all those kinds of things, and largely a good idea and fine, you need to know enough to be able to know whether you're being shot straight with, whether people are dealing with you straight, whether it sounds right to you. And the thing about, like, there's an old adage that, oh, my spouse is a physician, but he's not so great in business. He's a physician. And I think it's a very false adage. The reality is, many physicians make magnificent business people. It's just making that decision. It's not going to happen by osmosis unless you make it an effort to do it. You have to decide, I want to be great as a physician, and I want to know enough about business. I want to learn about business. It's not going to just sort of happen. You've got to actually make the effort to be great at both. And then it's quite doable. And it's really making that decision. It's like, I want to be a great golfer. There's no way it's happening without me taking a ton of lessons from people and really working at it. Like I can't get better without it. And it's so true in so many aspects of life, and I am awful, but I'll be less awful if I actually seek help and try and get help on it and figure out what I have to do. But it's true about this. So many physicians are great in business. You just have to make that choice. I'm going to be great as a physician, and I'm going to be great in business. We were dealing last week with the interventional radiologist, Dr. Mehta, and Nisha has built this magnificent community called Physician Side Gigs, about physicians that are both practicing, but doing interesting things on the side as well, business on the side. And but it's a decision that you really want to pursue learning about it as well. It's not going to happen. It's mostly not going to happen organically. I mean, obviously in some practices, you from an early age can be so involved in the business management of the practice that you will learn a lot about it, but it's helpful to constantly look at how do you supplement that with some formal education and mentoring and coaching too.
I think that's an excellent point. It kind of goes back to also what we were talking about a little earlier, where, being open to learning, always being, I think the lifelong learning of medicine, it expands out of just clinical practice or clinical medicine. I think it's also, being open to learning these things and wanting, not just for your own personal growth, but also to help better take care of patients. I mean, a better run practice is, going to better care of patients most likely. And so I think that's...
Well, no, it really is. You're going to have better help. You're going to have better staff. You're going to have better people around. You're almost certainly going to do better at it. Most physicians are extremely bright, extremely disciplined. You don't get to medical school. You don't get to medical school and residency without being pretty disciplined, pretty bright. And so the concept of it's a matter, but they have to actually apply their efforts to learning that as well. I mean, but they're very... There's no blockage in doing so. They're very capable. They're great learners and really smart. So it's easy. It's very easy to do, but you have to choose to do it.
Sure, sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. So my final question I ask every guest this is what do you do to balance your life outside of all your work and endeavors? Where do you find that balance if there is one?
Sure. So mine is awful. It's all these sort of like fitness type things, golf type stuff, tennis type stuff, any kind of sport type stuff, those kinds of things. Obviously, we spend a ton of time with the kids and stuff like that, as long as they'll let us spend a lot of time with them. Tennis, I grew up playing. I'm fairly good at it. Golf, I didn't grow up playing. I didn't start until my late 40s. I'm awful at it. Not as awful as I was, but still awful. It drives me crazy when some of my buddies beat me. It drives me absolutely nuts. And then a lot of fitness stuff, just trying to stay mentally and physically healthy as we get older. They say is when you're younger, they say health is everything. And when you're younger, you don't really think that. You think, oh no, I got to make a living. I got to build a practice. I got to do a business. I got to do whatever I'm doing. But as you get older, certainly you realize, and I think this generation has a better clarity focus on it, that physical and mental health is everything. So a lot of focus on those things. And I'm middling at it. It's a constant effort to try and stay reasonably in shape, reasonably healthy, reasonably all those things. I'm not great at it, but we enjoy it tremendously and constantly working hard at it.
That's awesome. It's fun. I grew up playing tennis and golf too. Those are two big passions of mine. I try to, play in tennis leagues and things like that when I can. And I as I was telling you before we started recording, I come from Chicago, and one of the things I do up in Chicago often is play Cog Hill. I don't know if you've ever played over there, where
Sure.
they used to play the BMW championship. But that's an amazing course. Always fun to play out there.
Well, so I've not played there because I am so bad they won't let me play there. But someday I aspire to do so. No, I didn't grow up playing golf. I grew up later in life playing golf. My brother-in-law who's in Atlanta plays tennis in those leagues and stuff like that. So maybe you'll run into him and tell him to come see his in-laws at some point too. It would be good if you get a chance. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, but it would be okay if you told him. It'd be okay. It'd be nice. But no, he's good. But it's we love it. But it's oh my goodness, it's a humbling game. It really is. But great fun, and we're working at it. We're not. It's when I was a kid, I would say every Sunday, oh, I'm not going to drink again for a while. I'm done drinking. Now it's every Sunday. Well, I'm done with that driver. I'm not going to do that driver again for a long time. And then sooner or later, by Thursday, I'm like, I think it's a weapon. I'm going to be good with the driver this weekend, but it's a disaster. So we'll see how it goes. But I'm giving up my driver this week.
Sometimes you got to do that,
It is.
I've been playing the game for over 25 years, and it's a humbling game. There's times I go out there and you'll look at me and be like, man, this guy's really been playing that long. So we all have our days out there.
It's awful. It's really awful. It really is awful. It's very addictive. I never thought I was such an ADD type person, such a hyperactive person by nature. I drink so much coffee, so active. I never thought I'd become addicted to it, and very addicted to it. I see why it's an addictive game, but it's just it's very humbling. It's like this concept of it teaches you to seek help, and it's humbling because I know I have to seek help to get better. So I'm using that mantra in all aspects of life, is not being afraid as a egotistical male to seek help, because we all need it.
Yeah. No, it's funny. The day before I left for medical school, I shot a 72, and I've never come close. I mean, I've shot a couple of times. I've shot in the 70s, here and there, but no, especially if I went out right now, I definitely would not shoot that.
The good news, Dr. Cooper, is if we went out to play, I would be getting a lot of strokes. So we would come out with we'd come out, figure out the wager is, because I'd be getting a lot of strokes. And so I'm hoping I'd be able to take money just based on strokes. So whenever you want to come play, I'll take my handicap strokes, and we'll see if we can get you out there. I'm going to base your handicap as a scratch because you hit a 0. So you get 0. Then I'm getting a lot of strokes, and we'll play.
I think that'd be a lot of fun,
You're not being hustled, but I'm all in. Anyways.
That's awesome. Anyways, well, Scott, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think I learned a lot, and I'm sure the listeners will learn a lot as well.
Great fun to visit with you, sir. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DaVinci Hour podcast, presented by DaVinci Academy. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your podcast platform of choice to catch the latest episodes. Please leave a comment or a review and share it with a friend. Lastly, you can find all of our podcasts, video courses, and books on our website, dviacademy.com. Thank you for listening.